Give your house to your sister as she deserves it more, my parents demanded. I have always been neglected by my parents, but now they want me to give up my life savings for their golden child. I am done with them. Lily, 26F, remember the day I signed the papers like it was yesterday. The room was small, with a dusty window that let in just enough light to make the old wood floor gleam. I sat there, my heart racing, clutching the pen like it was my lifeline. The house was mine, completely, unequivocally mine. The little cottage on Willow Street wasn't perfect, but it was mine. A white picket fence that had seen better days, a garden overgrown with wildflowers and stubborn weeds, and a creaky front door that whispered tales of its past. But to me, it was a masterpiece. Every inch of it was a testament to years of sacrifice, late nights working extra shifts, and the relentless pursuit of a dream. I'd been saving for this day since I was 25. No fancy vacations, no expensive gadgets, just long hours at the coffee shop, side gigs, and the relentless belief that one day, I'd own a place to call my own. The day I moved in, I danced in the empty living room, the echoes of my footsteps filling the space like a symphony. I was free. No landlords, no roommates who borrowed my clothes without asking, no passive-aggressive notes on the fridge. Just me, my dreams, and the promise of a future carved out with my own hands. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. It was a Tuesday morning when my phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand. The soft glow of dawn crept through the curtains, casting a warm hue over the room. I had just finished my coffee, savoring the calm, when I saw Mom's name flashing on the screen. I hesitated. Her calls were rare, and when they usually came with a purpose. I picked up. "Lily, sweetheart," Mom's voice floated through, soft yet carrying an edge I couldn't quite place. "We need to talk." I couldn't quite place. "We need to talk." I sat up, my heart doing that annoying flutter thing it always did when something felt off. "Hey, Mom. What's up?" There was a pause on the other end, filled with the faint sound of rustling, like she was shifting papers. Then, "It's about Emma." My stomach twisted. Emma was my younger sister, the golden child of the family, the one who always seemed to glide through life effortlessly. She'd just gone through a messy divorce, lost her job, and was struggling to get back on her feet. "But we all had our battles, didn't we? She's having a hard time, Lily," Dad's voice joined in, his tone more direct, like he'd been waiting for his turn to speak. "She needs a place to live. And well, we were thinking, since you've got that lovely house now, you could give it to her." I stared at my phone, feeling like the room had suddenly shrunk. "You're asking me to give her my house?" I repeated, my voice a little sharper than I intended. "Well, it's not just about the house," Mom replied quickly. "It's about family. Emma's really struggling. She's been through so much." I knew they were trying to guilt-trip me, but the sting of their words cut deep. This house wasn't just a property. It was my sanctuary, my independence, the result of years of hard work. I worked my ass off for this, Mom. I saved every penny. I stopped, taking a deep breath. I can't just hand it over because she's having a tough time. That's not how this works. Silence. Then Dad's voice, calm but firm, "We're not asking, Lily. We're saying you should." The line went dead. I sat there, staring at the screen, heart pounding, feeling like the walls of my new home were closing in. But that wasn't the end of it. The next day, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there they were, Mom, Dad, and Emma. Standing there like they had every right to be there. "Lily, sweetheart," Mom said with that same forced smile, as if everything was normal. "We thought we'd come by, see how you're doing." I stared at them, my heart racing. "I'm doing fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Emma chimed in, her voice soft but loaded with guilt. "We just wanted to check in. Maybe talk." I didn't invite them in. I stood there, arms crossed, refusing to move. "We're just here to help," Dad said, his eyes sharp. "You know, family helps family." I clenched my jaw. "I don't need your help." I've worked for everything I have. This is my home, and I'm not giving it up. But they didn't leave. They stayed there, pestering me with calls, showing up unannounced, knocking on the door like they had a key. It was exhausting. It felt like they were trying to break me. But I wasn't going to bend, and that's when the memories flooded back, the ones I'd tried so hard to bury. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. The one who did everything right, followed the rules, and got the grades to match. But it was never enough. Emma was the one who got praised for being free-spirited, for her charm, her effortless grace. While I was busy working part-time jobs and tutoring myself to keep up, Emma was out being the fun one, the creative one. When I was 15, I'd saved up enough from babysitting to buy a guitar. But the moment I brought it home, Mom said, "Why don't you focus on your studies instead of wasting time with that?" Meanwhile, Emma was encouraged to skip her math tests to go to dance recitals, and now, here they were, expecting me to give up everything I'd worked for, as if my efforts were just the background noise to Emma's story. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I changed the locks, not out of spite, but out of necessity. My home was my sanctuary, the only place where I felt truly free. And I wasn't going to let them walk in and take that from me, but I underestimated their determination. I never thought I'd be the type to change the locks on my own family. But that's exactly what I did. It wasn't an act of defiance, it was a declaration. A statement to the people who'd spent my entire life teaching me that my worth was measured by how much I could give, how much I could sacrifice. The new locks were heavy-duty, the kind you'd find on a fortified door. I had them installed the day after Mom, Dad, and Emma left, their faces etched with disbelief. They didn't understand. They thought I was being stubborn, that I'd cave in eventually. But this wasn't about stubbornness. It was about survival. I still remember the first time I heard the knock after changing the locks. It was late, around 9 p.m. I'd been settling in with a glass of wine, the soft hum of jazz filling the quiet space. The knock was sharp, aggressive, like someone was trying to force their way in. I didn't even bother checking through the peephole. I knew who it was. I opened the door just enough to see Dad standing there, his face flushed, eyes narrowed. Mom was behind him, her arms crossed, Emma clutching a bag of groceries like that somehow made her less guilty. "Lily," Dad barked, his voice tight, "open the door. We're not here to cause trouble." I stared at him, heart pounding but my resolve steel strong. "Then don't," I replied, my voice cold. The mom stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We just want to talk. You can't shut us out forever." But that's exactly what I was doing. I slammed the door shut. I didn't slam it in anger, I slammed it in defiance. The next day, they came back, and the day after that, they didn't care that I'd changed the locks. They didn't care about my boundaries. They thought family was an invisible key that gave them access to my life whenever they wanted. I didn't answer the door. I didn't even look through the peephole. I just sat there, feeling the walls of my sanctuary closing in. But then, the knocking became louder. It wasn't just knocking anymore. It was banging, thudding like they were trying to break the door down. I called the police. When the officers arrived, they found my parents and Emma standing on the porch, their faces red, their fists clenched. Dad was the first to speak. "She's our daughter. We're just trying to talk to her." The officer raised an eyebrow. "She's called us because she's feeling threatened." Mom's face twisted. "She's being unreasonable. We're family." The officer didn't argue. He simply told them to leave and not come back without proper legal channels. But that wasn't the end. Later that night, I found a note slipped under the door. "You'll regret this, Lily. Family comes first." I stared at the words, feeling a mix of anger and heartbreak, but I didn't regret it. I realized that family doesn't always mean unconditional love. Sometimes, it means setting boundaries, even when it hurts. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. "We're coming over. You can't keep us out forever." I knew then that this wasn't just about a house, it was about who I was, and I was done being the girl who always gave in. I was ready to fight. woke up to the sound of some noise outside my gate. My heart jolted as I woke up and looked outside the main window. There they were, Mom, Dad, and Emma, their faces twisted with fury. Dad had a crowbar in his hand, Mom was shouting something I couldn't hear, and Emma stood there, her expression hard, her eyes filled with determination. Not guilt, they didn't care about boundaries anymore. They were here to take what they thought was rightfully theirs. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking but my mind razor sharp. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher answered, they're trying to break into my house, I whispered, my voice trembling with adrenaline. My parents and my sister. They're armed with a crowbar. The dispatcher responded calmly, instructing me to stay on the line and find a safe place. I retreated to the bedroom, locking the door behind me, heart racing. I could hear the sound of metal against wood, the scrape of the crowbar prying at the door. Then a loud crack, the sound of the lock breaking. They were inside. I pressed myself against the wall, my phone still clutched in my hand. The dispatcher's voice was a lifeline, grounding me. They're in, I whispered. I heard footsteps approaching, heavy and angry. Then the door burst open. Dad stood there, his face red, eyes wild. Lily! He bellowed. Open the door. But I didn't. Mom was right behind him, her face twisted in rage. You're being ungrateful, Lily. This is family. Emma appeared, her face set, her jaw clenched with the same fierce resolve as our parents. You think you're better than us now? She snapped, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. I felt a wave of emotions crash over me, anger, fear, betrayal. But then I remembered something. This was my home. My sanctuary. And I wasn't going to let them take that from me. The dispatcher's voice cut through the chaos. The police are on their way. Stay on the line. Dad kicked the door, the wood splintering under the force. I knew it wouldn't hold much longer, but then, I heard the distant sirens. Dad's face twisted in fury as he realized the cavalry was arriving. Let's go, he spat, grabbing Mom's arm. Emma hesitated, her gaze meeting mine. But there was no remorse in her eyes, only defiance. Forget her, she said coldly, turning away, and they were gone. The police arrived minutes later, their lights flashing against the dark sky. They took statements, collected evidence, and informed me that my parents and sister could face charges for breaking and entering. As the officers left, one of them turned to me and said, "You did the right thing. You're safe now." But I wasn't sure if I was. I sat on the couch, staring at the broken lock, the splinters scattered across the floor. This was more than just a broken door. It was the final piece of the illusion that family always meant unconditional love. It didn't. Family could be complicated. Sometimes, it was messy. Sometimes, it was painful, but I wasn't going to let them take my peace, not anymore. The days that followed the break-in felt like I was living in a courtroom drama, except there were no scripts, no rehearsals, and certainly no dramatic music in the background. Just me, a pile of legal documents, and an overwhelming sense of disbelief that my own family had pushed things this far. The first call came from the police, the kind of call that makes your chest tighten before you even say hello. "Ms. Harper, we've filed charges against your parents and sister for breaking and entering, property damage, and trespassing. We'll need you to provide a formal statement." I nodded as if they could see me through the phone. "Of course. I'll be there." I dressed in something sharp, black slacks, a tailored blazer, and just enough eyeliner to look like I meant business. This wasn't about looking fierce, it was about feeling it. When I arrived at the station, the waiting area was cold and sterile. The walls were lined with posters about crime prevention, and the air smelled faintly of bleach and old coffee. I was led into an interview room where a detective named Marlowe greeted me with a nod. "Ms. Harper, thank you for coming in." I sat down, hands clenched in my lap. "We've reviewed your statement, and given the circumstances, your family is facing serious charges," Marlowe explained. "But we'll need more details, what happened, what they said, any threats." I took a deep breath and recounted everything. The phone call from Emma, the banging on the door, the crowbar, the shouting. How they didn't just cross boundaries, They shattered them. Marlowe listened carefully, jotting down notes. When I finished, he looked up. Your parents and sister aren't just family anymore. They're suspects. And we're treating this case seriously. It hit me then, this wasn't just about a house. It was about the abuse of trust, the betrayal of family bonds that should have been sacred. The next few weeks were a blur. Court dates, legal documents, and an avalanche of emotions I wasn't prepared for. The days leading up to the trial were the hardest. I replayed the break-in over and over, questioning if I'd handled it right, if I'd been too harsh, too stubborn. But no matter how many times I questioned myself, the answer was always the same. I had done what I needed to do. Court day arrived like an uninvited guest. The courthouse was imposing, its gray stone facade a stark contrast to the bright blue sky. Inside, it was eerily quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of papers and the low murmur of voices. I sat in the gallery, my heart pounding with a rhythm that felt too loud for the hushed courtroom. The judge entered, his robes flowing behind him like the final curtain of a show. The trial began with opening statements. The prosecution painted my family as entitled, manipulative, and desperate, while the defense tried to spin me as the unreasonable one, the selfish daughter who couldn't see the bigger picture. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand, my heart a clenched fist in my chest. The wooden chair creaked under me as I sat, the weight of my family's betrayal pressing down like 1,000 bricks. The defense attorney, a man with sharp features and an even sharper voice, leaned in. Ms. Harper, wouldn't you agree that family should come first? That sometimes sacrifices are necessary for the people you love? I swallowed hard, steadying my voice. I used to believe that. I thought family was about unconditional love, about support. But what I learned is that love doesn't mean you have to lose yourself. It doesn't mean you have to give up everything you've worked for just because someone else is struggling. The courtroom grew still. The attorney tried to poke holes in my story, questioning every detail, but I stood my ground. I told them about the years of feeling invisible, the countless times I'd been expected to give, to sacrifice, to be the responsible one while Emma was free to be the fun one. And then I said something I hadn't planned. I didn't break into their lives. They broke into mine. The words hung in the air, heavier than any evidence presented. The judge called for a recess, and I left the stand feeling like I'd just bared my soul. The verdict came a few days later. The judge's voice was firm as he delivered the decision. My parents and sister are guilty of breaking and entering, with additional charges for trespassing and property damage. The courtroom erupted in whispers, but I sat there, numb and relieved. They were facing jail time, but it wasn't about punishment, it was about accountability. When the gavel fell, I didn't feel victorious. I felt liberated. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by their expectations. I wasn't the girl who always gave in. I was the woman who stood her ground, and that was worth more than any house. The courtroom was behind me, the echoes of the verdict still lingering like distant thunder. The days that followed felt like walking through fog, everything blurred, everything distant. I'd won. I'd fought. I'd stood my ground, but victory wasn't the loud, triumphant roar I'd expected. It was quiet. A hollow space where my family used to be. I returned to the house I'd bought with my own life savings, the one they'd tried to claim as theirs. The locks were still new, the door frame scarred from the break-in. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, wondering if I was supposed to feel different. I wasn't. The house felt like mine now, not because of the legal battle, but because I'd earned it with every decision I'd made to protect myself. I started small. I cleared out the debris, fixed the broken door frame, and cleaned every corner of the place. I even painted the walls a color I'd always wanted, a bold shade of teal that felt like freedom. I found solace in the little things, the way the morning sunlight danced through the windows, casting patterns on the floor. The quiet hum of my favorite playlist filling the space, unapologetically loud, the absence of voices demanding, criticizing, or manipulating. But it wasn't just about the house. I began to rebuild my life. I called friends I'd lost touch with, went out for coffee without worrying about what time I'd have to be home, and even joined a local book club, something I'd always wanted to do but never felt allowed to. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, I got a text, "Lily, it's Emma. We need to talk." I stared at the screen, my heart doing that weird fluttering thing. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me wanted to scream, "You had your chance." But another part, one that wasn't about anger, but about closure, made me reply, "I'm not sure there's anything left to say." She responded almost immediately, "I'm sorry. For everything. I miss you." I sat there for a long time, staring at the message, wondering if I should reply, but then I realized something. I didn't miss her. I missed the idea of having a family that loved me unconditionally. But that wasn't real. That was a fantasy I'd outgrown, so I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Moving on wasn't about forgetting. It was about acceptance. About realizing that some people are meant to be part of your life, but not in the way you expect. I woke up the next morning feeling lighter. The house was still mine. The walls still stood strong. And I was still standing, stronger than I'd ever been. Moving on didn't mean erasing the past. It meant choosing myself, and that was the beginning of everything. The house was quiet now, filled with the gentle rhythm of my own life. No more banging on the door, no more shouting through the walls, no more faces that expected me to shrink into the background. Just me, the soft creak of the floorboards, and the occasional whisper of the wind brushing against the windows. I had settled into a routine that felt like breathing again after holding my breath for far too long. Mornings started with coffee on the porch, the mug warm in my hands, steam rising like tiny promises. Afternoons were for writing, journaling my thoughts, drafting ideas for stories, and finally giving myself permission to explore creativity without guilt. Evenings? They were mine. Filled with quiet dinners, dim lights, and the occasional phone call with friends who'd never asked me to be less than I was, but the truth was, I wasn't just moving on. I was becoming. One day, I found myself standing in the middle of the living room, staring at the wall where an old, faded photograph of my family used to hang. It was a snapshot of a time I'd outgrown, a memory that no longer defined me. I didn't feel anger when I looked at it anymore, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had been. I took it down, not with rage, but with peace. The next morning, I woke up to a message from an unfamiliar number. "Hi Lily. This is Alex from the community center. We're hosting a writing workshop next week. And I noticed you'd expressed interest in volunteering. Just wanted to follow up." I stared at the message, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. I'd forgotten about that email, forgotten about the part of me that loved stories, that dreamed of writing not just for myself but for others. I replied, my fingers typing with a newfound confidence, "Hi Alex, thank you for reaching out. I'd love to volunteer and be part of the workshop. Looking forward to it." The week flew by, filled with excitement and anticipation. When the day of the workshop arrived, I felt nervous, an unfamiliar sensation after everything I'd been through. But when I walked into the community center, I was greeted by a room full of people eager to share their stories. That's when I realized something profound. I wasn't just moving on from my family, I was building a new family. I met people who didn't expect me to be anyone other than myself. There was Maria, who'd just moved to the city and wanted to write about her experiences as an immigrant. There was Jamal, a retired teacher with stories about his travels across the world. And there was Alex, the organizer, whose warmth made me feel like I belonged the moment I walked in. For the first time in years, I felt seen. The workshop became a space where I could breathe freely, where my words mattered, and where my past didn't hold me hostage. But the real surprise came when Alex invited me to a small gathering after the workshop, just a few people, sharing food, stories, and laughter. That night, as I sat surrounded by people who didn't expect anything from me except to be present, I realized that I was more than just someone who'd survived a family betrayal. I was someone who thrived because of it. The house wasn't just a building anymore. It was a home filled with memories I'd chosen to create, not ones I'd been forced to carry. And as I looked around at the friends I'd made, I realized that family isn't just about blood, it's about the people who show up, who stay, and who choose you even when you've been broken.